board members of Eskom, my colleagues at Eskom, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And thank you so much for making time to come and see us today. We felt it prudent and important that we resuscitate, we revitalize the status of the system briefing. We want to do so, ladies and gentlemen, because we felt that we have to keep the nation informed. We also want to raise issues from our own side. But before I can start presenting what we have planned here, I think this gathering here today comes at the right time. It comes at the right time in the sense that we have just completed the non-deal roadshow, both for domestic and foreign investors. So I thought it appropriate to cover at a very high level some of the issues that were discussed in those deliberations. The first thing before I go and explain those was a positive feel that we picked up in our engagement with the investors. A feel about the country and a positive feel again about Eskom, and that is positive. But there are 5 key issues that I would like to touch on that seem to dominate those discussions. The first one was the latest, where are we on corporate governance? The second one is funding status. Where are we in funding? The Eskom. The third one was a comprehensive long-term strategy. The fourth one was the coal challenging issues and what caused it. That was the main thing. Then the 5th issue came towards the end of our roadshow, foreign roadshow, I think because of the coverage in South Africa. It was asking us about load shedding. Is it imminent? So some of these issues will be covered in the presentation, but I thought as a point of departure, I'm going to touch on those things. Corporate governance. We told investors that we continue to do the investigations and we are taking decisions whenever we find wrongdoing. We continue on reviewing the contracts, 5,000 of them, and we have covered a lot of ground because we feel that we have to make sure, as the demands or as the request by the board, that we have to ensure that everything is above the board. In those discussions, from time to time, we ended up discussing the issue of McKinsey and Trillion, which seems to dominate the whole stories. And we were able to answer that, yes, McKinsey has committed to pay back the 1 billion, that 2 trillion has not shown any indication whatsoever of doing so, that the issue is at the High Court, and that the asset forfeiter is very happy to have this money coming to Eskom. I'm saying these things because from time to time, we'll be expected to present the developments on these contracts. The third issue that we have done is what we're supposed to do is lifestyle audits. When we started, we thought by now we'll have completed this process, but it has proved quite challenging on legal processes, and we're hoping we'll be starting next week because there are certain things that needed to be done. Then it comes to whistleblowing. We have 239 cases, as it has already been reported, of whistleblowing from January as at the end of March. Out of those, 75 have been investigated. And out of that 75, 39 we feel that there should be disciplinary processes. The whistleblowing facility is important for 2 reasons. The first thing it indicates It indicates that the staff members are now willing to use our control systems, which is something they were not that comfortable in using. That's the first thing. But the second thing, in line with the board directive, wherever the investigation has been undertaken, we made sure that we make the necessary decision. So it's a commitment that we made to the staff that come and tell us what happened, we'll take action. The second issue is funding requirement. Since January, we've been able to raise a gross borrowing of 43 billion. We are beginning to see investors coming in, both domestic and foreign. We'd like to see more, and we'll still engage with them. On the comprehensive long-term strategy, there's a lot of work that has been done. The agreement between the board and the Minister of Public Enterprises is that the process should be completed at least the latest in September. There is a mutual agreement between management and the board that things have to be done differently from now on if we are to ensure that this institution is sustainable. We have to maximize revenue. Municipal debt is a challenge that we are facing, and accordingly, we have visited 4 parliamentary committees, and our story has been consistent and very same. If we don't deal with this issue, it's going to be a challenge. And secondly, investors are worried about this. They want us to show that we have the power to take decisions. And accordingly, we will deal with those municipalities that do not pay. And we have support. We have had support from Parliament. The third one is about our cost. We need to deal with our cost, both operational and CapEx, and we are looking into that. Then the issue of coal challenges and why are we here? It's a number of events that have taken place, but I'll give you just the high level as to why we're where we are. The first thing, of course, was the underinvestment in cost plus mines. That had an impact, but it had been decided upon due to capital constraints. This put a strain in the supply of coal. Secondly, there was an issue on Tegeta that did not meet their targets. And 3, coal mines were affected. With that, we had to get coal from internal and it affected others. But now, Tegeta is under business rescue, so that has impacted us. The previous board and management, of course, had tried to deal with the issue. They raised the issue with the National Treasury, but there were corporate governance and compliance issues that National Treasury was worried about. It took a bit longer. The new board, which came in January, by February, at least was able, through the engagement, to convince the National Treasury on approving this. This was approved, but the process of coal procurement is a bit different than, say, going to the shop and buying the bread. The process is not as simple as going to the shop to buy the bread. But we have done quite a number of things in that respect, and we are beginning to see the results of that. I'm highlighting these things because during the presentation, further to the presentation, you'll see the impact thereof. Then the new one that came in, as we're concluding our roadshow, was whether load shedding is imminent, is coming up. Our view is that we are producing 46,000 megawatts of electricity in South Africa. The planned and unplanned outages is roughly about 10,000, goes to 12,000 or so. And that leaves us with resources of about 3,000 that we can make use of. We think that holding all other things constant, as economists say, we are not going to have any load shedding. We think that that problem could only take place if there are certain anomalies that can come to bear. whether it's natural catastrophe, whether one big power station has huge problems and it cannot continue. But as we'll show the numbers here, we are comfortable on what we have, and we'll continue to do so. That is a very high-level discussions with the investors, and it does highlight some of the challenges that we're going to talk about. Please allow me to get into the presentation. You will note, and I want to emphasize this, that while Eskom is facing some challenges, the operational performance of this institution is acceptable. I'm saying this before because I'm confident of what you're going to see. The situation in South Africa would have been worse if Eskom had severe challenges also on these operational performances. Please allow me to go through the presentation. The summary, as you can see here. Energy availability, an improvement from last year from 77 to 78%. Capacity that had been added on the national grid, 2,387 megawatts. New transmission lines, 722. New substation transformer capacity, 2,510. During the year under review, we have managed to electrify more than 215,000 clients. Of course, we are looking at elasticity demand because we feel that, as I've already indicated, that's an area that we have to maximize. The load shedding issue I've already touched on. And we think, and that's important, that is not likely. On operational highlights, we've spoken about energy available factor, 78. Although I must highlight that the planned and unplanned outages that took place during the last quarter of the year from December have changed the scenario. Otherwise, the numbers will be better, but we'll talk about that. Planned maintenance, 10.4 against target of 10%. Unplanned maintenance, 10.2. And new connections, we've spoken about that. We've spoken about new build capacity, 2,387 megawatts. And commission transform capacity is 2,510. Transmission, again, 722. Could we have done better than this? Yes, surely we could have done better. Are we excited? Yes, there is an element of excitement, but we can do more. Bringing the business into perspective. Year-end planned maintenance was 10.4 compared to the target. And the maintenance, again, on generation is 10.2. On transmission, when you're talking about systems minute, that is less than a minute, we did the best we have done. That was the performance is 2 minutes, 9 seconds. On the target of 3 minutes, 53 seconds. We had a zero major incident during 2017-18. In other words, there was, during the year, no incident where the correction took more than a minute. That's a great achievement of those people that on day-to-day basis wake up and go and do the work. We've spoken about the distribution. When it comes to Medupi, yes, there have been teething problems on the new business. But Unit 5 and Unit 4 was commercialized on 3 April and 28 of November. Each have an installed capacity of 794 megawatts. Kusile, commercialized 30 August 2017. Installed capacity 799. Medupi 3, Kusile 2, synchronized to the national grid 24th of March and 8th of April. Transmission, we're speaking about 722 kilometers transmission lines that we installed. We have spoken about 2,510 MVA transformer capacity. We want to highlight that on the unplanned maintenance, you will see a bigger increase or an increase in the last quarter of the year. This was because of unplanned outages that we experienced, but we'll come back to that. So, in March 2018, UCLF increased by 16.6%. That was primarily because of Letaba 3 units. You'll see it in the numbers. On the maintenance side, the year-end planned maintenance, again 10.4, against a target of 10. Slightly down from last year. UCL, compared to the year before, 10.2 and 9.9. OCGT is 0.56 for the year. I want to touch on this, which is less than a 1% target. Now, I do agree, and we do agree with the team, that the OCGT during the last quarter has increased, but we'll cover that. But some of the things that have come up in the media, that we are spending $1 billion a month on this are wrong. This is the amount that was spent, which is 320, against the budget of 620. Environmental issues which remain important. Particulate emissions is 0.27 against the target of 0.34. On the liters kilowatts hour, again is 130 against a target of 137. Then this is a big story. The generation achieved on the available factor, energy available factor. Yes, it has come down. From 82, it's come down to 69. But we can provide reasons for that. The first one is the increase on planned outages. And those planned outages gain momentum in summer, November, December, as you can see going forward. That is because Eskom always prepares for winter in summer. That's what they do. But there's a second reason also that is in here. And that is up during, oh, sorry. Yeah. During this period of time here, the ability of Eskom to access the financial market was rather limited. And accordingly, when the new board came in and there was access, we then began to increase the planned outages, some of them that should have been done before. There is an increase on unplanned. The majority of it is teething problems of the new systems that we have, Medupi and Kusile. But over and above that, we had 2 power stations that were giving us problems here. You will see that by the end of the year, the unplanned had increased to 16.6%. That was because Letabe, which we started working on it in November. We're supposed to have completed it here, and we didn't, and accordingly it moved to unplanned. However, the story is a bit different now. two of their units have been dealt with. So in May, these numbers will be different. But the story is different. So the OCG usage will reflect this. In other words, it will reflect that towards the end of the financial year, there was an increase in outages, and we then had to find the substitute, as reflected here. This is us. It increases a bit December, January. Then there's this huge, again, mainly because of Litabe. But you will then see, because of the 2 units that have been brought back to operations, this in April has since come down. And again, this is important. It's 320 million against the budget of 620. So where are we with coal? About 2 weeks and last week, we were saying there are 7 power stations that do not have sufficient coal. That is, it covers 20 days. We're happy to say now there are 6. Komati is now back on stream. And if you are lucky, my colleagues told me that I should not be too optimistic, but if we are lucky, and if it works according to the projections, we are hoping that in 1 to 2 weeks' time, that number will have decreased to 5. So how many days of the stockpile do we have? We have 35 days against the 2008 year before the challenges that we were facing, where we had the stockpile only for 12 days. If we include Medupi and Kusile, the stockpile increases to 65 days. Yes, we have challenges on coal. I've already spoken about that, but we do have a recovery plan. We are sourcing additional coal from the suppliers, and we continue to do so. And we are moving coal within our own power stations. Importantly, we are discussing with the Together resource practitioners on increasing or on having the coal supply at Chandrina. These are all the things that we are doing to make sure that come winter, we have sufficient coal. If you can look this through a bigger picture, I will concentrate on the peak period. You will know that we will use OCTG primarily during this period of time and in August up until December. So we'll see gas being used. However, we're still far from the reserves up there. That assumes, of course, that the unplanned does not increase by a bigger percentage. You know, we're all entitled to our opinions as to the challenges that we are facing. My limited knowledge of what is happening here doesn't tell me that on Friday we are not going to have electricity in South Africa. It does indicate that we are going to make use of gas from time to time. And that's a fact. On the distribution side, you know, the system's average interruption duration index and the system's average interruption frequency index. There has been growth, there has been development. Distribution lines are still above 350,000, and we are maintaining those. And by the way, globally, we're one of the biggest. We have one of the biggest distribution lines. There is a reliable network. And the electrification of 215, we feel that we can do more than that. And we are talking to the Department of Energy with that regard. The two have been covered. I just want to highlight that during winter, we tend to have some outages because of the overload, network overload. This is the result of illegal connections, vandalism, and equipment theft. We are working on that. But on the customers, we have increased revenue, and we are targeting to increase this even more. 148 power stations, power customers have been connected. That's 1,361 gigawatts. 26,000 small customers were connected. We did exceed the limit, or we did exceed our target when it comes to installing prepaid meters in Sandton, Midrand, and Soweto. And we'll continue to do so. The universal access. The target was 201, we're 215, and we have since communicated to the department that we're willing to take even more. Transmission. We have already spoken about systems minute, that we have achieved the best ever reported performance in 2 minutes, 09 seconds, against a target of 3 minutes, or 4 minutes, close to 4 minutes, and that there was 0 major incident. And the number of interruptions were reduced to 24 against a target of 34. On the plant performance, almost 99% of the planned work was executed on maintenance. With regard to excellent line fault performance per 100 kilometers, again, 186. That was achieved against 2.2 target. Substation plant reliability, we were close to a target. With regard to IPPs, you're talking 9,479 gigawatt hour against 2017-18, where we had 7,227. It's a whopping increase of 31%. Let's talk about the new build. We have already spoken about the challenges, the teething problems that we had. Just want to highlight that in 5 years' time, since 2015, we put in 4,613 megawatts. We are hopeful and confident that in another 5 years, we'll put in 6,382. That's an increase of 38% or so. Since 2005, we have put this 10,750. Kusile will add another 800 megawatts. Now, we are not saying it's smooth sailing. And neither are we saying that we are not encountering challenges and problems as we do this. But if you try to analyze Eskom, you take the operational performance outside of all the challenges that we have, you begin to see that we have the largest chunk of people in this 47,000 people employed by Eskom have done the best they could. And that we get clouded by those few individuals that have taken upon themselves that instead of putting the country first, they put themselves first as to what is good for us. But Eskom is more than that. And this is what this story tells. let me conclude my conclusion. Should we celebrate? Should we then say we are safe? Still too early. But I can tell you without any benefit of doubt that we are safe. What we need to do is to encourage those people that have delivered this to continue doing so on the one side. And on the other, deal with those that have done what is not needed, the wrong stuff. Because if you do that, you then create a kind of a culture that inculcates performance that is even far better than this. That is what South Africa needs. That is what South Africa deserves. And that is why we have been employed to do this job. We need to take painful, difficult decisions to do so. And there are quite a number of things that have to be done for us to achieve that goal. We need to deal with municipal debt. We need to deal with our own sustainable model to ensure that Eskom lives another 95 years. We leave a viable institutions for those that come after us. We need to concentrate on finalizing the long-term strategy of Eskom. Because once we do so, then it will be clearer to every South African as to what the future of energy is in this country. We are confident, resilient, that we are on the right trajectory. And we know that if we can say that Eskom doesn't have challenges, we'll be lying to ourselves. But we are dealing with those challenges. So as South Africans, yes, the environment is not the best, it's not the ideal, but it's not dead. It's an environment we can work and build this country through. And with those few words, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Harebe. This is now the opportunity for us to maybe ask any clarity-seeking questions or even commendations if you have, because you never know. I'm going to take, I would say, tranches of 4 so that we can get through the questions as many as we can, and then we will take it from there. So you'll tell us as to who you are, the organization you represent, and then you will give us your questions. We have a team of executives from Eskom, plus senior managers as well, and I see also one board member, but primarily the session is for the executives. So yeah, I'm sure we are ready to answer all the questions that you have. I'm gonna start on my right-hand side and then move as we go along. So I'm gonna on the left side of the right side. So I'm gonna start with Harry, and then I'll do Antoinette, and then I see Chris, and then I'll take, yes. Joy, yes. So those are the, I think, 4, if I'm not mistaken, that I'll take, and then we'll move on to the other ones.
Hi, it's Heidi Jockus from ENCA. I just need to understand what your plan is in terms of, you guys say that you're going to source coal from power stations that currently have a surplus. What is going to happen to those power stations?
And those live visuals are from the Eskom proceedings, are briefing the media on the energy supply status. Some concerns, of course, around whether there is imminent blackouts or load shedding that we can anticipate for this winter. And Pagamani Hadebe, the interim Eskom CEO, given clarity that they went on an extensive roadshow to lure and pursue the investors to ensure that all is in order when it comes to capital that is required for operational expenses, and trying to allay any fears that indeed Eskom is perhaps going to suffer from any load shedding, saying that the country's electricity grid, as far as he's concerned, is quite stable. He's confident that we won't be experiencing any discomfort when it comes to blackouts, and that there has been significant improvements made in their capacity from last year to where we are today. And currently he's fielding questions as well from members of the press and other stakeholders.
Well, moving on with our bulletin, sentencing proceedings in the Karabo Mokoena case gets underway in the South Gauteng High Court. Let's go live.
House.
Karabo are mama ke nako e siameng ya go papa o tshantse a tsebe gore ke tswa le mang.
And Karabo responded by saying, yes, mommy, it's the perfect time for daddy to know who I'm going out with.
And then papa zanga fitla ge. And then ba tswa ge le molatofadiwa.
And daddy did not arrive, and they went out with the accused.
Ba ntho e ke lemogileng mo magareng ga bona ba le two. Aka bona batho ba ba ratanang, sort of. Ha o le mme o kgona go bona batho ba ratanang.
But what I saw between the two of them, I did not see two people who were in love. When you are a mother, you can see people who are in love, but with them,
O kare ke batho fela, like friends, because ha re tswa re ba khapa ko koloing. Karabo mention gore a ke tse o itse a re o batla go etsa eng o ya kae and then sandile molatofadiwa go fetola ga gagwe o fetola like ga na taba, I mean yetsa ntho o batlang go yetsa a ke batle ka o sane o bo re nna go postitse gore o etse ntho o sa batleng go yetsa.
As we anticipate the sentencing procedures in the Karabo Mokoena murder trial, yesterday we saw Sandile Manswe being found guilty of premeditated murder and two other counts. Testifying seems to be continuing there in court as we anticipate to find out how long it will be that Sandile Manswe will be going to jail for those three counts. But the convicted killer, Sandile Manswe, says Karabo Mokwena's family failed to do the things he did for. Manswe was testifying during sentencing proceedings, which are currently underway, as we can see in the South Gauteng High Court this morning. Manswe said he is remorseful and apologizes to Karabo's family. He also says he failed her because he wasn't prepared to settle down. Yesterday, the court found Sandile Manswe guilty for killing Karabo Mokoena back in April 2017. And Manswe was also found guilty of assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and defeating the ends of justice. Let's go back live now to those court proceedings.
And she would say that the accused has assaulted her, and I would say to Karabo, why don't you leave him? Why are you staying in a relationship where you are being beaten like something? And Karabo would just dismiss me by saying, Mommy, I love him, and just leave him, things would be better. You know, kids when they're in love.
And every time I get a lobula case, no, Mommy, muto.
Right, those are court proceedings in the Sandile Manswe murder accused who's been found guilty of the murder of his former girlfriend Karabo Mokoena. Other charges include causing grievous bodily harm and defeating the ends of justice. Karabo Mokoena's mother now speaking through an interpreter, explaining their relationship and saying that there was no love between the two of them, what she had observed with their demeanor and their mannerisms when Sandile came to fetch Karabo, saying that she wanted to find out from the father, or at least verify with him if it's okay for Karabo to go out, but the father hadn't returned on time. So those are the details, the nitty-gritties and the painstaking detail that the mother has to give as you see those live visuals from the South Gauteng High Court. We'll go back to that story in a bit.
Well, let's move on with our bulletin for now. Transport Minister Blade Nzimande has visited the Bidskop level crossing in Cape Town, where many lives have been lost due to trains colliding with motor vehicles.
Nzimande's visit follows the death of 7 people after a bakkie they were traveling in was struck by a train on the level crossing last week. In a previous accident, 10 learners were killed in similar circumstances when a train collided with a scholar transport in 2010. The passenger safety regulator says initial investigations suggest that the signal system on the rail track was fully functional on the day. However, residents in the area blame the accident on the system, and a full-scale investigation is currently underway.
The preliminary investigation report basically shows a lot of the things we've already discussed. It confirms that the train, remember what it does is to state the facts of what happened. But I think what is most important for us is to now go and investigate and understand, looking at the footage, to see what actually happened in terms of the driver himself. We know what happened with the train. We know it was traveling at 80 kilometers per hour. We are aware, we know that the booms were operational. We tested them immediately after the accident. And now we need to go look at the footage. And once we've got that information, we should be in a better position to release a much more detailed report.
Engineering and infrastructure that needs to be put in here must also act as a disincentive to people from actually zigzagging and doing all these other things that are dangerous. So we also accept that we do have a role as government, to do things in such a way that we discourage that kind of behavior. But also it's true, that education is very important, in order to... I also wish, by the way, that in this investigation, we also follow even with the employers, Why were these workers in a bakkie? Is it normal, the manner in which they actually get carried, so that we understand exactly the totality of what happened, so that employers themselves must also be able to assist us and not actually allow workers to travel under very dangerous conditions, And what are the arrangements,
The memorial service of television and radio personality Akumzi Jizile will be held today at 2 p.m. at the Rhema Bible Church in Randburg.
The 29-year-old was involved in a fatal car crash on the N6 near Queenstown in the Eastern Cape, and the car crash claimed the lives of 4 others, including media personalities Siyasanga Kobese and Tobani Mseleni. Jizile's funeral service will be held at the Rhema Bible Church at 9 a.m. on Saturday. The African National Congress has recommended that the national officials immediately meet with the Premier of the Northwest Province, Supra Mahumapelo, to discuss what it called all available constructive options to resolve the ongoing impasse.
Now, the embattled Premier has been the target of violent protests calling for him to step down. The organization's National Working Committee met in Cape Town yesterday. It also welcomed the intervention of Cabinet. It said this was in the interest of restoring good governance and service delivery. The NWC added that it reflected on the deep crisis in the health and other departments in the Northwest. Violent protests rocked the province in recent weeks, prompting President Cyril Ramaphosa to cut short a trip to a gathering of the Commonwealth heads of state to intervene. Speculation in some media is that a task team led by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma may announce his recall this week. Premier Mahumapelo believes he is a target of those who are opposed to his efforts of economic transformation in the province.
The situation is calm in the south of Johannesburg following violent service delivery protest action.
Now, residents of Soweto and Eldorado Park took to the streets on Wednesday demanding housing, electricity, e-tolls, jobs and against the VAT increase. Several roads in and out of Johannesburg South were barricaded with rocks and burning tires. The Soweto Action Committee and Gauteng Civic Association says they were behind the mobilization of the various communities.
We received a call from the MEC's office that they want to meet. But what they want to do is they want to meet at their places. And we are saying no. As alliances, all of us are saying no. You have to come to the community and come speak to the community and let the community listen what is going on. If you want to meet us, you will come to Eldorado Park. And what we are asking as well, and what we are saying, as you can see, the protest that happened yesterday was peaceful. There was no looting. Shops was open. people attended school, and we're asking all communities to please leave the shops alone. Don't loot, leave the schools alone, let the children attend schools. We have problems with the housing issue. This is just escalating from 2017. We're bringing it up again today. And the reason why we're bringing it up again today is we were promises about the housing issue. It will be sorted out in 2017, which Minister Sisulu mentioned. Up till today, nothing has happened. Paul Mashitile came out to the area, say that they earmark land. The land is not earmarked as yet because we don't have it in black and white.
Nothing is being happening concerning housing. The people is crying. It's raining, it's flooding. Old people is being removed from the sector in Extension 11 Pumbo, what was built for Kliptown residents only. But people evaluate the premises. That's raw, there's nothing happening because they are tired of waiting for houses. As myself, from 1996, I'm still waiting for a house. We got a community center, nothing is happened by our community center. So we need for every woman to stand up. And if they're not going to do something, we as a community, we're going to do something. Because it's long we're waiting, it's long we're struggling. They said they removed the old people first, but nothing is happened. Still old people is sitting there. Like myself, I'm still sitting there. With my children, nothing has happened.
It's a much calmer situation this morning compared to yesterday here. At the moment I am in Eldorado Park where things seem to be going as forward as usual. We've seen multiple transport going back and forward, kids attending school, which we saw quite a few of them out of school yesterday. Seems businesses are opening. Everything seems to be back to normal.
Well, it is time to get you your sports updates this morning, and for that we are joined by our sports anchor, Len Moleko. Morning, Len. What's happening? Any changes in the world of sport?
Well, thank you very much, Abigail. Well, we're going to start off with some cricket news. Justin Langai has been named as Australia's new head coach, replacing Darren Lehmann, who resigned in the wake of the ball tampering scandal. The former opener, currently with Western Australia and Perth Scorchers, has signed a 4-year deal. Lehmann played no part in the ball tampering plot on Australia's tour of South Africa in March. He initially declared his intentions to carry on as coach, only to resign before the fourth and final test. Captain Steve Smith and Vice-Captain David Warner were sacked and banned for a year in their part in the controversy, while batsman Cameron Bancroft was suspended for 9 months. Lehmann, who took charge in 2013, had previously announced that he would step down after the Ashes in England in 2019. A left-handed batsman, Langa played 105 tests for Australia, and he retired from international cricket in 2007 at the end of a 5-0 Ashes victory against England. Moving to some football, Arsenal will travel to the Wanda Metropolitan, and knowing that they are 90 minutes away from taking another step into the Champions League qualification when they bring with them a 1-1 scoreline against Atletico Madrid in the Europa League second leg semi-final tie. Meanwhile, Olympique Marseille travel to Austria with a 2-0 aggregate lead against a Red Bull Salzburg.
Atletico Madrid officially surrendered their La Liga title hopes this past weekend when FC Barcelona were officially crowned champions of Spain. That, though, does not end the season for Los Rojiblancos, as they will be looking to earn a spot in the final of the Europa League when they host Arsenal in the second leg at the Wanda Metropolitana. The Madrid side grabbed a late equalizer in North London last week, despite being outplayed for most of the match. Atletico would not want a repeat of that, and they will need to make sure there is no room for error should they have any chance of winning their second Europa League title in 6 years.
Seguramente que mal. Está claro de que estoy triste por esta situación y bueno, nada, tendré que mejorar, como lo dije, y bueno, mejor me callo, nada más.
Meanwhile, for the Gunners, they are 90 minutes away or even 180 minutes away from giving longtime manager Arsene Wenger the perfect send-off. The aggregate scoreline does not favour the Gunners, but they will take heart from Chelsea's win in the Spanish capital back in September last year in the Champions League. Going 2 seasons without Champions League football seems impossible, and hence Wenger wants his side to rise to the occasion and cause an upset.
I believe that every manager has his own personality, and he's doing extremely well in what he does. He tries to influence his team in a positive way. Many times he manages to do it. Last week he has been sent off. And only the referee can make that decision.
Meanwhile, in Austria, Olympique Marseille bring with them a 2-0 aggregate scoreline against Red Bull Salzburg as the French side seek their first European final since 2004.
To the tennis court we go. Novak Djokovic blames his recent decline on premature return from an elbow injury, and he says he's working hard to rediscover his winning form. Serbia's former world #1 returned to training 2 months after his January surgery and fell to successive first-round defeats at the Indian Wells and at the Miami Open.
Trenutno smo napravili planove koji se odnose na period do završetka sezone na šljaci. Dakle, još 3 turnira, završno sa Roland Garrosom. Nakon toga ćemo opet sesti i izanalizirati ono što se dogodilo i kroz šta smo prošli i praviti dalje planove, naravno. Nadamo se najboljem. Posljednjih mjesec dana deluju da su rešeni. Od Majamija igram bez bolova na terenu, tako da je to nešto što je došlo kao najlepša vest u ovom trenutku, jer sam stvarno imao velikih poteškoća da igram.
Well, to some boxing news, during Tyson Fury's absence, another British discovered his form. Anthony Joshua has taken the IBF, the IBO and the WBA along with the WBO World Heavyweight titles, and Fury says he's proud of Joshua's success. Despite Fury wanting to face off against his fellow British man, the man from the south of Manchester has indicated that he wants Joshua to honor a world title bout against America's Deontay Wilder.
Listen, he's done very, very well, like I said in many other media things. I'm very proud of him for what he's done. He's changed his stance, where he's come from to where he is today. He's done very, very well, and you can only respect and admire people who've got that determination and drive to go out there and take what they want. Because nothing in life is ever going to be given to anybody. You have to go out there and fight for it. No matter what business you're in and what business you're not in, sports, whatever, you have to fight for what you want in life. And he's done that, so he's done very, very well.
Well, that's all the sports for now. A live report continues with Abigail and Cindy.
Thank you very much, Len. We'll see you a little bit later for further sports updates this morning. But moving on, Eskom is currently briefing the media on the state of the power supply ahead of the winter season. Let's go back live to those proceedings.
Recently announced that you're inviting bids for Eskom Finance Company, which essentially is a mortgage lender. So I was just interested, apart from that, what other non-core assets are you interested in divesting this year? The second question is, you've recently returned from a non-deal roadshow. Do you plan any deal roadshows this year? Do you plan to sell bonds on the public market, either to domestic or international investors, and in what volume?
Thank you so much. And Sigomati, part of your question has been answered already, I'm sure. The road show was a non-deal one, but you'll get another bite. Angela is now okay, so he's okay. Yeah, then you can give it to the lady next to you.
This is just a little bit of extra clarity on one of the supervisors' questions. Sorry, I didn't come in there about it. In terms of all this extra coal procurement, emergency coal procurement that you do, how much extra is it costing you? There's an idea of what you're doing to ameliorate the effects in terms of finance. Are you raising more debt to get this coal? Are you selling extra stuff off? Are you cutting costs somewhere? Please could you just give us some detail? Sorry, and then just one quick thing on the nurse tariff application. You indicated that you were going to potentially, possibly review, take the decision, the last decision on court review. Can you give us some clarity on where the process is and what you're looking at?
Thank you so much, Lindy. Thank you so much, Lindy. The last one would be Susan.
Hi, Susan. Water investigations into coal shortages at Kendrina last year had discovered. You'll recall that overnight Eskom went from thinking that it had around 20 days of coal to discovering it only had 8 days of coal. So I just want to know what resulted in the coal book being inaccurate. As I see it, there are 3 possibilities. Either the quarterly survey was inaccurate, all the coal deliveries were inaccurate, And it's possible that someone perhaps was stealing coal from the stockpile. That seems like a lot of coal to take. Or the third possibility that the expected coal burn rate was inaccurate, and that perhaps due to low quality coal, you were burning more coal than you were recording in the coal book. I think if you could just go through that for me, that would be really helpful. And perhaps also just indicate if there's any indication that Eskom employees had somehow played a role in intentionally obscuring those figures.
Thank you, Susan. Terence?
Just on what your coal procurement budget for 2018-19 was, and what it will be with the addition of the short-term purchases to replenish your stockpiles for the year, and at what average cost per tonne you expect to secure this additional coal. And then if you could give us a time frame for all 6 remaining plants to be back at their required target for stockpile. Thanks.
Thank you. Chris, I've noted you. The next round, I'll start with you. Mr. Harden.
Start at Sekonat, and I request, I will transfer to my colleagues. Coal replenishment, how much will it cost? I think CFO.
I think in terms of the coal, we are still busy going through the RFP. We haven't placed contracts as yet. On some of the contracts we have placed. So the chief executive is also pushing us to say, tell us how much more it's going to cost, what will we do for the budget. But I think we are trying our best to negotiate within the parameters that we have.
We actually had a meeting with the Minister of Public Enterprises on the 17th of April, Minister Gordon, where he directed us that we need to review the board committees and their appropriateness. So at this point in time, everything is under review as far as board committees are concerned. And then on the second question around the executives, we actually have done our work at executive level. It is our expectation that the current executives that are here and also the acting executives will continue to do the cleanup operation. Oh, okay. We already have made a recommendation to the minister. My understanding is that the minister is going to go to cabinet on the 9th. So therefore, we should be able to know after that. Together with the CFO.
A question on EFC. What are the 9 core assets you have? Sorry? Okay, could you give
at this point in time, Eskom's only non-core asset that it's disposing of is our home loan book, Eskom Finance Company.
Yeah, with regard to foreign bond, it's an option we have, and in our budget we did put about 12 billion in issuing in the foreign market, and we went there just to give them the developments, and probably somewhere in July, August or so, we'll assess the situation and probably we will raise a foreign bond. On coal, cutting costs from somewhere. And the NESA issue?
See, while you are deciding on that, I just want to make a request to our executives or managers on the floor. When you do make speeches or respond to questions, please face the nation so that they know who you are.
There's a NASA one. Yeah. Regarding, okay, so my apologies. I'm trying to understand the question. The question on tariff increase, we are reviewing all the options. Right? We haven't made the final decision. We'll still have to communicate this with the minister and with the board. So there hasn't been any finality on the issue. Hendrina?
So let me just talk about Hendrina, but before I go there was a question about the coal budget. Just to go back, like I said, I don't know the exact number, but what I do know is that you'll see now when we present our annual financial statements, there was a saving on primary energy for the last financial year. Somehow I do not think that you'll see it this year. That's the message I want to give, because we obviously have to procure more coal. And obviously there's a lot of factors that go about when you procure coal this financial year. I think it's the price of the exported coal, the rand-dollar exchange rate influences it as well. So are we cutting and saving money to give to the primary energy? Yes, that's what the CFO has to help us. We're obviously going to try to see where we can save from a primary energy point of view. Obviously, the less diesel we use, that would go to some of the savings as well. But on the Hendrina issue, yes, there were irregularities around the Hendrina stockpile days. There was an investigation. An investigation was recommended certain outcomes in terms of disciplinary action against senior people. We have taken action against senior people in the primary energy environment as well as the power station environment. I would think that to give further details may not be appropriate, as it may jeopardize the continuing investigation and the necessary disciplinary process against those individuals.
And if it is a question of that the issue of using an expected coal burn rate and that not matching up to the coal quality being delivered, that could happen again. And we don't obviously want to have a situation where Eskom discovers overnight that the stockpiles are a third of what it was. All I'm asking is if you can give us some detail that would help to clarify whether this was a once-off freak accident or if this is a problem that Eskom is likely to experience again.
So my understanding is that immediately after this incident, we did a verification check.
Verification check. It's got nothing to do with burn rate, as I understand. And we did a check at all other power stations. We did surveys, aerial surveys, as well as physical checks on the stockpile to make sure that the error that was picked up and the abnormalities in Hendrina wasn't repeated at any of the other stations. We've actually now narrowed the gap between where we do these surveys to make sure that we do it more regularly to make sure that we pick up these issues. But I'm fairly certain that that issue at Hendrina will not be repeated. I'm not sure if my colleague Willie maybe wants us to add on.
Yes, I can add yes. There was an issues in terms of the calorific values that were used, which affected the burn rate, but that has all been rectified. New processes and procedures have been put into place. And as Deva said, we also got our independent audit and forensics department to actually go and do the aerial surveys so that we at all times we are sure that we've got the correct stock days.
We'll take what is probably the last round now. But before we get to the people here, let me just confirm one more time if we do have people on the chorus line. Nothing. So we'll start with you, Chris. And I see Siseko, Antoinette, and then Sikonati. But before you, Sikonati, the lady here, and then it's ladies first. So yeah, we will start from Chris.
Thank you. A question on the coal price. Eskom has been quite open in the past about high prices of coal it was paying at certain power stations. So I'd like to ask, as I understand it, Hendrina has not been receiving coal from Optimum since November last year. What price is Eskom paying per ton of coal trucked to Hendrina? As I say, Eskom have been very open about this before. So I'm not sure there shouldn't be any reason why you should not agree to to give this. And the reason I'm asking is because the business practitioners are suggesting that they can deliver coal to Hendrina at 400 Rand a ton. So my question is, what price are you currently paying to truck in coal to Hendrina? A second question, if I may, and that is a question of environmental sustainability. It's my view that environmental sustainability is always the sacrificial lamb to operational and financial sustainability. Can you advise us how many Eskom power stations currently, coal-fired power stations, are in breach technically of the environmental regulations of South Africa and can only continue operating as a result of exemptions that have been granted from meeting the laws of South Africa? So I'm asking, to what extent is Eskom environmentally sustainable, and to what extent is it a breach of the law, other than that it has got exemptions from the Department of Environment to this effect? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Sisako?
Hi, my name is Sisako from Business Report. My question, the first question relates to the steps that Eskom is taking in response to the coal shortages at the various power stations. I'd like to know. I'd like to know if the steps that you're taking, that includes diverting coal power stations and also perhaps running the OCGTs, will those pass? Are you confident that those will pass the regulator's potency and efficiency test when in future you submit an RCA application? Secondly, the Hendrina contract, the long-term contract, comes to an end in December. When are you going to start with the procurement process of that contract? Thank you.
Yeah, Antoinette?
Mr. Mudigi, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. When Mr. Mudigi was getting up, Eskom, he said that Eskom is doing away with the cost-plus mines. It was a change in policy. Have you, in other words, rescinded that decision? Is the policy again to proceed with the cost-plus mines? And then NERSA specifically recommended that Eskom should close some of its power stations. What response has Eskom embarked on in that regard so far? And then I believe there was an issue with international debt. Has that been resolved? With debt from an international buyer, I think it was Zimbabwe. Yeah.
Thank you, Antoinette. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Odwa from Bloomberg. I have a question for Mr. Govender. Could you please just repeat the details with regards to the 3 streams that you mentioned in terms of coal procurement? And I just also want to find out, have you already secured that buffer amount, and how much of coal would that be?
Thank you, Odwa. Sikonati, sorry, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Katebe, have you received the 11 million rand from Brian Molefe? If not, when are you getting it? Where is Monges in Tsokolo? He used to sit there. Lastly, you did not answer my question about how much money does Eskom have in the kitty, and how does that relate to what it should have as working capital? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, Sikonat, just repeat your question. I think your first one shocked me. You're saying I have 11 million from Brian.
The High Court and indeed the Supreme Court of Appeal
Okay.
has said Brian Molefe must pay back 11 million rand to Eskom.
Okay.
Has he paid it? When is he paying it? I'll repeat the others for your benefit, sir.
You can repeat that.
Where is Monges in Tsokolo?
Okay.
How much money does Eskom have in the bank? How does that relate to what it should have in terms of working capital?
Okay.
Ndiyabulela tata. That will be all for this round. I'll give over to the CE and the team to
Okay.
respond.
Thank you so much. On Hendrina on coal from Chris.
I don't have the detail of what price per ton delivered on trucks, but I'm not sure. I also do not recall we actually gave that type of information previously. Andre, am I correct? We've never developed that previously. Yes, unfortunately, I'm not Mr. Molefi, so I'm saying we are involved in negotiations with coal, so I'm very reluctant to discuss commercial issues and how much we do it because obviously there's a competitive edge involved in that. So we have not disclosed that previously, not to my knowledge. It may have been disclosed previously, but from my side, I'm very reluctant to give that type of detail. On the Hendrina issue, but suffice to say is that we are, like you said, the business practitioners. We're seeking a mandate to negotiate with them in terms of coal delivery. Optimum has not supplied coal to Hendrina. The last bit of coal that was delivered was somewhere in March, beginning of March, 1,000 tons or something. And since beginning of March, we have received nothing. I think we received for one day, so we have not received anything since then. So we've been trucking in coal the whole time in terms of that. In terms of the environmental sustainability, so just a couple of clarifications. We do not get exemptions anymore. Exemptions were granted by the Department of Environmental Affairs previously. It is now called, we are basically asked for postponements. And presently, all our power stations, in terms of any of the environmental legislations, whether it is particulate emissions, NOxes, SOxes, we are meeting all those based on the postponements that we have been given. So as we speak, we are not breaking any law. How many have got postponement? I think, I can't remember all offhand, but I remember there was about 4. I know that now recently, for the last month, we've actually now applied for postponement for Tutuka. That probably makes 5. I can't remember the exact number, but I know that we have also applied for postponements for example, SOxes at Medupi and Kusile because of the quality of the coal. Once we've put in FGDs, then that issue is also it. But I think the important part of your question is, are we breaking any of the laws of the country? As we said, no. Yeah.
Would you be breaking the laws if you had not received postponement?
Quite a few. Yes. But that's the reason why we ask for postponements, because to meet the legislative requirements in this country, for all the power stations, for everything, particulate, NOxes, SOxes, is in the region of 400 billion rand. Neither Eskom nor this country can afford that amount of money. That's why we went to the Department of Environmental Affairs and said, we cannot afford it, so they've given us what we term a 57% compliance plan, where they're allowing us for certain stations to give postponements. Certain stations we have to put in what we term like fabric filter plants, put in FGDs, and we are working on that plan. But funding is still a challenge for some of those plants. In terms of the question about Hendrina, so in terms of the question about Hendrina, I've answered the question about Hendrina in terms of coal. The contract, as my understanding, doesn't come at the end of December. It comes actually the June 2019. That's my understanding of where the contract comes in. The issue about closing of power stations, issues like that, NERSA, was a question from NERSA about shutting down power stations. So I think we start off from a primary point of view is to say, besides the legislative issues that Mr. Yellen mentioned, there's also one called, we separated because what Mr. Yellen asked was about atmospheric issues. There's another one called CO2. And that's a one that, as a country, we have committed to reduce the CO2 in the country. The only way you reduce CO2 is to cut the source. The only way you cut the source is you basically close down power stations to meet that requirement. Now, that's something that, as a country, we have to deal with. We have made certain commitments at COP21 to say we will reduce CO2 by certain levels. And obviously the biggest role play in the country is Eskom. So we have to look and take that into account. So we have not made any firm decision as yet about shutting down power stations. We are busy with a governance process. We have a new board. We are busy soliciting that with the new board. And until we reach a time where we've followed a full process and we've consulted stakeholders, including the government, and then we'll communicate in terms of shutting down power stations. What we have done is we have taken some of the units that we regard as uneconomical to repair and put them in preservation, until such time that we may decide whether we bring them back or don't bring them back.
Antoinette, with regard to cost plus mines, we have set a budget, so we'll be working with them. We wouldn't have put a budget if we're not going to work with them, and we've had a discussion with them. With regard to closing of some of the power stations, the discussions are at the board level. We're looking at pros and cons as to whether that should be finalized. So once the board is finalized, we'll make the announcement with that regard. I think you're asking us about the Zimbabwe debt. It's been paid by Zimbabwe, not the full amount, but we have an agreement which Zimbabwe has always met. So we are expecting more payment over time. Then there's Andra, who asked you how much will that be?
Oh, sorry, the three issues around the coal streams. I think my colleague did a better job than me, so maybe let him just repeat the three issues that we're busy with from a long-term perspective in terms of the coal.
Skonati, then the... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, basically, as we've said, in terms of the long term, what we are busy with is looking at the capitalization of our cost plus mines to make sure that they will produce for the period that they are supposed to produce, and making the volumes that they are supposed to make. So apart from the cost plus mines, we have gone out on a tender for 100 million tons of coal over the next 5-6 years period. We are not expecting much coal of that to flow within the next financial year or this financial year. It was more a long-term requirement to supply us in terms of our shortfall coal. What we are seeing at this stage is that we are basically about 84% contracted for the period up to 2025. We are seeing about the 14-15% shortfall, 16% shortfall per annum, and that is the whole intention of this 100 million ton RFP that we went out with, and that we are busy now in the process of evaluation, and negotiations have basically started with some of those suppliers. The third stream, as we've said, was we have gone out on an RFP for the full 60-year life of Kusile Power Station. That process has also been closed, and negotiations are basically in the process of starting. Just in terms of the securing of coal, we are basically every year having a shortfall coal, because I think, as we all know, burn is changing. We are looking, so we are not aiming to have 100% fully contracted coal contracts. We might end up in the same position as we are at Medupi, where we are basically in a position of failure to take. So we are looking at our coal, and what is the real certainty in terms of long-term coal requirements at each one of the individual power stations, so that we don't get into a situation of overcommitment. I can just mention, in FY 2018, we have established about 23 contracts. Those contracts are fluctuating between a 6 months contract up to basically 12 years contracts. So it's not as if the coal is not flowing. We are in that process, and it's a continuous process. If I can just say, I mean, at the end of October, we were actually in a fairly healthy position in terms of our coal stock days. At that point in time, we only had 2 power stations that were below the minimum, and both those 2 power stations had more than 30 days of coal. I think what has happened, and that has really pushed us in this position of where we are sitting with this additional shortfall, was basically the Tegeta situation where we, on a very short notice, had to replace, and the Tegeta mines are supplying in the region of about 8.5 million tons of coal per annum, which we now have to replace in the very short term. And I think that is the one thing that has pushed us into this direction of a short-term shortfall in terms of the coal.
Thank you. Then, Skonati, 11 million from Brian. I'm not aware that we've received that. And Mongi is on leave. How much money has come? I think the CFO can answer.
Caleb, if you can just stand up for us. Caleb Kasem is our acting CFO.
Yes, our cash balance that we have currently is about 14 billion. Obviously, our target is more like 20 billion at any point in time. What has been positive is that we see that the domestic markets have now opened up and are providing financing to Eskom. We've done quite a bit of transactions both in the month of March as well as April. So that gives us confidence that we'll be able to deal with our funding requirements and executing a funding program, which is a tight and difficult one, together with the positive sentiment we received on the non-deal roadshow. Thanks. No, I'm not aware of any 11 million at this point in time. No, I'm not aware that we've received anything.
We haven't received 11 million. He was talking about your second question. Yeah.
14 billion rand of cash in at the moment. 20 billion, that's our normal target.
Thank you. I think we have, which one was it, Konati? Sisako?
I asked if Eskom is going to be able to cover the costs that are associated with this whole project.
Oh, okay, sure. Thank you.
I'm curious about the June 2019 date for the expiry of the contract, because I think all along, the communication from Eskom has been that the contract ends in December 2018. I think most of us here are hearing the June 2019 date for the first time.
Thank you, Sisako. In fact, if you allow me, because I see, maybe just to add on the list that we already have, Sisako obviously is clarity-seeking question. Angelo, we missed him last time, so he has a burning question, and then we'll also take a second bite with Bloomberg. Angelo.
Angelo Kotler from China Global Television. You talked about the municipal debt. Can you quantify what that is at the moment, as in this month, and what you're actually doing to get debt down to more manageable levels?
Thank you. Thank you, Angelo. Next one.
Sorry, just a very quick clarification. The required target at the power plants with the 6 ones which we're below, that is 35 days, is it? And is that a regulatory requirement, or is that your internal rule, or is it what is the target? Is it? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that generally concludes the Q&A session. Over to you, CE.
Okay, again, maybe just to start off by giving context, as you know, 40% of our revenue comes from the municipalities. Where the debt is at this point in time, by the end of March 2018, we're sitting at 13.5 billion. This is in comparison to 9.4 billion, which was the number last year. In terms of what we are doing, I think the CE actually did mention that we are intensifying the interruptions. So you will note that initially we used to interrupt the municipalities for 4.5 hours. What we have done now is to interrupt them for 6.5 hours for the first week, and then we push it up to 14 hours if they do not respond.
The second thing that we do, of course, is to sign payment arrangements. And we're finding that in cases where we haven't gone to the 14 hours, it's because they have come to pay and they've also signed acceptable payment arrangements. What we also have done is, I think Pagamani mentioned that, is we have engaged government to really highlight the problem and say that we also need support from their side to help us to get the debt from the municipalities. We have also engaged organized business so that they can also assist. Some of the gains that we have gotten from business is to actually get them to pay Eskom directly. So we've got a couple of cases where the customers of the municipalities, especially the big ones, they pay us directly. So those are some of the initiatives that we have implemented, which we are seeing some gains from.
In terms of the coal question, so the issue around Hendrina, I must be very transparent. I'm also playing a bit of catch-up in this new role, so I may not have all the exact facts, but my recollection, it was June 2019. It was originally December 2018, and it was extended to June 2019. Am I correct? So it's June 2019. The issue of recovering money from all these coal contracts, like the chief executive said, there's a lot of investigations. All these contracts will go through SIU, and obviously when those investigations are completed, then obviously we look and see how we can get some of the money coming out of that. In terms of those power stations, there was a question, correct, we never answered it. How long will it take to recover? The plan that we got put on the table says they start picking up June, July, and we look and see somewhere by October, November, where we start getting to the levels where they start meeting the minimum requirements. The other question about the minimum requirements versus statutory, it's a mix of both. We've put in our requirements saying for 20 days. But for example, one of the power stations, which is fairly old, the grid code says that if the power station is built around 1970, you don't have to meet the 20 days. You can be far lower than that. But I think for purposes that we don't confuse the public, we've stuck to the issue of saying minimum, which is 20 days. But we have different minimums for some stations as well. Some of the bigger stations, the minimum is not 20, it's probably 25, 26. So it's a combination of those. It's a very technically complex answer. That's why we just stuck to the issue of saying 7 stations, 20 days.
Well, in Setswana, there's a beautiful phrase that says, "Sisafeli nsiyathlola." That means that's the end of our business today. Thank you so much for coming, and drive safely.